but how much democracy and let's say elitist oligarchy or government do you like to see in a specific government? Because you said that democracy is fundamentally unequal. You said in a video that's you want to see a democracy that's or democracy is a representative government of the poor because they have the majority. But at the same time...
So that's actually not why. I'll tell you after. Continue your question.
But at the same time, as we mentioned earlier, like we said that like positive moral change, like at the end, there has to be somewhat enforced from this government elite from above.
Right.
Like how do you reconcile those two views? Like it's kind of hard to see.
Okay, good. So good question, but for me, it is an easy question to answer. This isn't to me a kind of unexpected or hard to answer question at all. I want government to be for the poor, not because the poor are the majority. In Canada, I don't think the poor are the majority. Maybe 20% of people in Canada. Maybe it's 30%. It's how we define it, but it's way less than 50%. So, but in Canada, depending on it may be 10%. I mean, not that Canada's a very rich country, but you just came from Luxembourg. But you came through Luxembourg.
Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah. You were in Luxembourg for a few hours. But some people have theorized almost nobody in Luxembourg is poor. Like they have a very tiny number of people who are poor. It's one of the wealthiest countries, but also one of the least poor. So they have a very, very small number of poor. The poor are a small minority there. So it's not now. Of course, it's a question what percentage of people are poor in China, but Laos or Cambodia. I've lived in countries where definitely the majority are poor. So sometimes the poor are a majority, and sometimes they're a minority. It is not because the poor are the majority that I want government by the poor and for the poor. It's because the poor are the people who need government help, who need government infrastructure. So, even in the example of, so let's say you have a train system. The train system, it doesn't really matter if it works well for the rich. Now, if it does, that's nice. Like, it's nice if there's a first-class carriage where rich people can drink champagne. You can have a swimming pool on the train, so rich people can pay $100 and go swimming. You can have a sauna. I don't care. That doesn't really matter for society. But it's tremendously important that you have seats on the train that are so cheap or subsidized that an unemployed poor person looking for a job can take the train from city to city and go and do job applications or go and get government benefits or go to the hospital, right? Now, again, like hospitals, I could go on with a million examples. If hospitals don't work for the rich, they have alternatives, they have options, they have ways to cope because they have money.
Yeah.
The poor need those government services. Now, I can say this to some extent about education, et cetera, et cetera. It is a little bit different. It's not really the same for education as it is for a train service. But broadly speaking, you get my point. Now, I have never known in the history of the world a society where the rich were so marginalized and voiceless that we really had to worry about them not being, that the government ignored them. The government just doesn't care about the millionaires who own factories. Their voice is not being heard in government. But it's theoretically possible. It's pretty close to theoretically impossible. So this is the issue of the government emphasis on the poor. But as I've already said, the poor may be a minority. They may be a small minority in a very successful democracy. Now, the other type of minority you're talking about ultimately are the people who care. So, if you have an open public consultation, if you have an open democratic process with a series of meetings to discuss sewage treatment, how is the government going to build a new sewage treatment plant? We just had this in Victoria, the city I live in Canada, and way back in the year 2000, I was involved in that democratic process in Toronto when the city of Toronto was planning a new, it was called the wastewater management plan. Wastewater sounds nicer than poo management plan, right? Who comes to the meeting? I do. I'm the kind of person who comes. I care about ecology. I care about politics. I care about those things. But if you don't force people to go against their will, that is going to be a minority of people. Now, I think actually there are questions of maybe not forcing people, but incentivizing people, creating a culture and even an economy where there are enough positive incentives that, I mean, you know, maybe you have to have a minimum. We say, look, if we don't have 10% of people participating in this, we're not going to make the decision at all. Look, we have to have a certain percentage of the public really involved in this process. Otherwise, we're not going to commit $10 billion to this, because the costs of these decisions can be huge.
Yeah.
You know, maybe there is. In ancient Athens, they would pay a salary to people. They would pay 3 obols a day for you to come to an important public meeting, and 1 obol a day if it was a less important meeting. So you would get paid a little bit of money to come and spend all day. Now, there are other things involved. There is a role of intelligence and education involved, but these people are going to choose themselves. I've sat down and gone through technical documents about air pollution, water pollution, and stuff. And when I was in Cambodia and Laos, they were different. In Laos, I got deeply involved in government policy on rubber farming, on the different types of agriculture and farming the government's making. I'm not an expert in agricultural engineering, and you're not either. Trust me, you're smart enough to sit down and read that stuff. You know, and part of it is when you see something you don't understand, going and finding a book, going and looking it up, figuring out what's going on here, being able to scrutinize the statistics. So you don't need to be an expert in agriculture or sewage treatment or anything, but you need to be someone with a kind of public spirit and sense of responsibility and curiosity and verve and tenacity. And not everybody can care about every issue, right? So in saying a minority of people are going to care, that ultimately a minority of people are going to be involved in the decision, I don't mean the rich or the poor. I mean that when you have real democracy, not everyone is going to be committed on every issue. Now, is that a problem? Yes. Gay rights, as an example. 2 types of people in Canada were highly motivated about gay rights. People who were gay themselves and the Catholic Church. And they were on opposite ends. So at that time, I mean, I don't remember Islam being a major player in Canada. We have a lot of Catholics in Canada. We didn't at that time have very many Muslims, but I'm sure also, you know, conservative Muslims had a position on it and so on. So, you know, one of the problems is when you involve too small a percentage of the public, you're going to get the polarization of special interests and not a representation of the broader society. So yeah, there are factors to be managed there. Okay, does that answer your question? Because for me, you ask a good question, but I don't feel it's contradictory or difficult for me. Yeah.
I just wanted to know like the underlying unifying philosophy. Like sometimes I just get bits and pieces of your views and just want to connect them. Yeah. Right. But so I like it. It's a kind of a cynical view of human nature and in politics. It's.
But the best thing in life is when those minorities can choose themselves. When people can choose themselves. So you know, even something like museums and art, you cannot leave questions about art in the hands of people who happen to be born rich, which in most societies is what it is. Someone is born rich. Their great-grandfather bought many paintings. Maybe they have paintings, like here in Europe, there are people, their great-grandfather bought paintings and put them in a castle. And now here they are today, and they don't care about art, whatever, and they're in this powerful position in the art world. They have money, they have an old collection of paintings, and they're going to be influential that way. How do people, how does the public, how does a democracy make questions about art, answer questions about art that really affects the public and that involve millions and millions of dollars of taxpayers' money? You know, tremendous costs. With tremendous long-term consequences. You know, that's a situation where it's so fundamentally elitist in its bias, even aristocratic in its bias, that it's very hard to create a meaningful democratic, you know, process that'll involve people. And where, I mean, definitely the vast majority of the poor, they don't care. They don't think it's their issue. You know, they're not going to be motivated even in the same way they may be motivated on gay rights or something. So these are challenges. Yeah, these are. Sorry, you say. Sorry, I was pointing. You saying it's a cynical view of human nature. You know, again, all the ancient Greeks they start from this assumption that when people get involved in politics, they are they are pursuing their self-interest.
Yeah.
Their interest as a person or as a class. But I mean, you're an example of this. So you used to think about veganism in terms of your health, which is one kind of self-interest, and then it broadened. You started thinking about it in terms of ecology and in terms of politics. It's all self-interest, but you've become more and more enlightened in your self-interest.
Yeah.
And your self-interest is aggrandizing and involves other people in the whole world, your whole country. Takes on these other dimensions. Yeah. So I mean, self-interest is not necessarily narrow and is not necessarily destructive or focused on your own entertainment or something.
Yeah. I sense John Adams behind the statement.
Well, okay. All right.
Yeah.